You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Melinda Francis, Norman Richmond, and joining us on the line, Dr. Gerald Horne. And Dr. Gerald Horne holds the John and J. Rebecca Moore's Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. And he has a book out now called Revolting Capital, Racism and Radicalism in Washington, D.C., 1900 to 2000. And another book out is called Acknowledging Radical Histories, and that is a collection of essays where he talks about African histories from Hank Aaron to Shaka and the Zulus type of situation. And Dr. Horne, how are you doing today?
Hey, it's all good.
I guess the first thing the world wants to know, what is your take on the current situation in Gaza? I guess that's the most burning issue in the world today.
Well, the crisis continues. The headline for today is that in the last hours, 15 Israeli soldiers have been killed, which is quite a number when you consider there are only 7 million Jewish people in that part of the world. And when you consider as well that by its own admission, the Israelis, after fighting since October 7th, October 8th, 2023, still hardly control half of Gaza, which is about the size of either Philadelphia or Manhattan. That suggests that they are getting quite a handful in terms of trying to corral Hamas. At the same time, let's be clear, there have been 20,000 people slaughtered, mostly women and children. It's been a relentless bombing crusade. You've had more journalists killed in that part of the world during this conflict than any other in recent memory, which is a reflection of the fact that the Israelis, with their typical brutality, are seeking to make sure that there are no witnesses. Which brings me to this point. I am heartened by the protests in North America against this ghastly, ghoulish war. But I have to say I'm a bit disappointed by the fact that many in North America do not realize that in protesting, they're trying to save Palestine from the fate that is descended in North America. That is to say that the difference between Palestine today and North America, let's say beginning in the 1500s and certainly accelerating in the 1800s, is that there were no cameras to record the genocide in the 1800s as there are cameras today. And this reminds me of the policy of former President Obama and his drone policy, which was to basically liquidate the alleged supposed terrorists rather than arrest them. Because if you arrest them and detain them, defense committees can spring up. There can be campaigns on their behalf. But once they're dead, it's more or less out of sight, out of mind. And that is fundamentally the policy of the Israelis, because already we have been told that in Israel, they're advertising for the construction of settlements in Gaza, or alternatively, they're trying to create some sort of buffer zone, that is to say, to push back the people, to push them south towards Egypt. And as we've said before, from their point of view, hopefully into the Sinai Desert, so that that land can be annexed. But once again, from their point of view, the stumbling block is not only the militants that are fighting back, not only with their handcrafted weapons, but also with their miles and miles of tunnels from which they spring up out of the ground, shoot an Israeli, and then duck back down into the ground. But the latest news, as you know, is that the forces in Yemen, which abuts the Red Sea heading towards the Suez Canal, a major artery with regard to global trade, have been fighting and have been attacking a certain vessel headed to Israel, to the point where BP, British Petroleum, has now said it will not be traversing the Red Sea into the Suez Canal and on into the Mediterranean, up towards European ports, be it Marseille or Lisbon or Rotterdam, for example. They're going to traverse via South Africa, oftentimes sailing through the Mozambique Channel, oftentimes sailing via Durban and the Cape of Good Hope, and then heading north. That, on the one hand, is going to be hampering the Egyptian economy, which rakes in about $9 billion from transit fees from ships. That money will not be coming to Egypt. And in light of the fact that General al-Sisi, the leader, has just been elected in the last week or so, apparently, allegedly, by a 90% margin, less revenue to the Suez Canal will mean less revenue to support healthcare, education, which should bring more people into the streets. Alternatively, there will be more revenue for South Africa, but the fly in the ointment there is that former President Jacob Zuma, who hails from KwaZulu-Natal, of which Durban is the centerpiece, has now bolted from the ruling African National Congress, which he once led, and has set up a new party. And despite the fact that it is now summer in Southern Africa and South Africa, we can expect more unrest, which might complicate the ability of the ships to traverse South African waters. It's also heartening that France, Spain, and Italy have decided not to join in to this so-called Operation Prosperity Garden, OPG. You know OPG, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good sign, although it may only be a kind of bluff, because it's possible that they just don't want to be under the command of the U.S. military, but they will accept a NATO command, which means you're under the command of the U.S. military in any case. Also in maritime news, Malaysia, the country in Southeast Asia, predominantly Islamic, has barred Israeli vessels or vessels headed towards Israel. We can expect something similar to take place in its neighbor, speaking of Indonesia, the largest predominantly Islamic country on planet Earth. And this is part of the tightening of the noose, hopefully, around Israel. And let me also say that in contemplating this present crisis, I should also mention that it reminds me of the 2005 movie, Munich. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that movie. It's a Spielberg movie about
yes, I am.
dramatizing the 72 attack on Israeli athletes at the Olympics in Munich. And I would suggest seeing that film. The screenplay is by Tony Kushner, who has collaborated with Spielberg more than once. And it's fairly progressive, particularly for someone who is considered to be part of the U.S. elite. And the ending of that film finds the Israeli Mossad agents who go on this campaign to liquidate the Palestinians who have killed the Israeli athletes. But at the end of the film, he throws up his hands and abandons Israel and moves to Brooklyn, which I think is quite telling. And then in the last scene of the film, the film comes out in 2005, as noted, there's a panoramic shot of the Twin Towers in Manhattan, which, as you know, crumbled into dust on September 11, 2001. And I think that there's a message there. And recalling that film, I also recall that it didn't do that well at the box office, considering that it was a Spielberg film. And many of the political pundits really excoriated the film. They thought it was much too sympathetic to the Palestinians. I didn't really think so. But I think it's part of the denial that folks or some pundits don't want to contemplate the magnitude of this crisis and what it is inevitably leading to. And that is, I'm afraid to say, something that is to the detriment of all of us. I'll stop there and pass the mic.
Let me ask you the question of Netanyahu. Can you talk about his situation, because it looks like he has pissed the mass of people in his own country off, or am I correct in saying that?
Netanyahu is 74 years old and has a popularity rating of 4. And as the joke goes, that's not 4%, that's 4 people, including his spouse and children, not even necessarily his in-laws. He's wildly unpopular, but as we've said before, he has a material interest in continuing this war, because whenever it ceases, he's going on trial and probably will go to jail. And I should also say that this war is really, as I said, I haven't seen enough self-criticism on the U.S. side of how we approach this precipice. Little self-criticism in terms of affixing the label accurately, settler colonialism to Israel, but not to the United States, for example. Little self-criticism in terms of how there has been a critique of Israeli policies, including settler expansion, but not necessarily of the underlying premise, which is Jewish nationalism, for example. This is quite disappointing, because it does not necessarily bode well. And at the same time, President Biden is losing popularity steadily because of this, but apparently he's willing to go down with the ship. Arab Americans, at least many of them, have promised and pledged that they will not vote for him. But this will compromise his re-election campaign, particularly in the critical state that is Michigan, abutting Ontario, for example. And so this may lead to the return to the White House of Mr. Trump. And once again, I don't see that much self-criticism as to how we arrived at the situation where this man, who faces 91 criminal charges and 3 to 4 trials, not to mention civil trials, is on the verge of returning to the White House. I don't think that folks want to do an analysis that would lead them to conclude that the 74 million who voted for Mr. Trump in November 2020, overwhelmingly the descendants of settlers, by the way, are enmeshed or involved in helping to engineer a counter-revolution. A counter-revolution not only in terms of returning Mr. Trump to power, but a counter-revolution in terms of turning back the clock with regard to anti-racism, turning back the clock with regard to anti-Jim Crow measures. It's apparent that that's what's in motion, but since there's this idealized view of the United States, which supposedly had this grand revolution, and speaking of criticisms, I don't think our friends in Canada have done us any favors by going along with that fantasy, making them not necessarily good neighbors and helping to point out where the United States has gone awry. And so this is a metastasizing crisis. There are many different culprits. A lot of finger pointing will be going on. But I must say that it's not looking very promising right now.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. You have some questions, Melinda?
I guess we didn't really talk about the Harvard Otani and the UN resolution.
Well, with regard to Harvard, just last year, Harvard selected a Black woman of Haitian immigrant parentage, speaking of Claudine Gay, to be the president of this oldest U.S. university, origins going back to 1637 in Massachusetts, an endowment between 40 and 50 billion dollars. She has been under fire. I'm afraid to say I'm not sure if she'll be able to survive. Why is she under fire? Well, she was sandbagged because despite being not favorable towards pro-Palestinian protests, she was seen as being as insufficiently vigorous with regard to defending the Israeli war. She was particularly sandbagged at the congressional hearings where she was set up. I mean, because the line in the United States is that if you call for intifada, that's calling for genocide against Jewish people. If you have raised the slogan from the river to the sea, that also means genocide. And so with that premise, the Congresswoman Stefanik, a Trumpista, said, is it against the codes at Harvard to call for genocide against Jewish people? And of course, the context was raising these slogans, intifada from the river to the sea, not necessarily going door to door and slashing the throat of Jewish people. And of course, she was trying to hem and haw and hedge. And that's led now, if you go to Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Harvard is located now, you'll see planes flying overhead saying that Harvard hates Jewish people and that Claudine Gay is responsible. You'll see trucks going through the narrow streets of Cambridge with billboards saying more or less the same thing. Now they've unearthed these charges that allegedly she plagiarized her doctoral dissertation. They're trying to say that she's a fraudulent scholar. The knives are out for President Gay, and I'm not sure she'll be able to survive. And that is not a good sign, because I was critical of the Black faculty a few weeks ago, but I think I have to walk that back because they've stood alongside her in a very public manner. The problem, however, is that a person like myself, it's not as if a person like myself and there are many people like me who can come to the defense of Claudine Gay, whereas many of these Black faculty during the Cold War period and thereafter, they've shunned the left. And so therefore, there's not a sort of a mass movement, an activist movement. And so all of them are quite vulnerable right now. Not only Claudine Gay, but these tenured Black faculty at Harvard, many of them who have salaries alone of $400,000 to $500,000 a year. So it's part of the counter-revolution that's unfolding because they feel that they can knock off these Black people at Harvard. It'll be easier and simpler to knock off Black people elsewhere. I've already talked about how the Zionist lobby is going after members of the Congressional Black Caucus who call for a ceasefire. They plan to knock them off and make sure that they're removed from Congress. And in terms of self-criticism, I think that the left also needs to do a self-criticism generally, because as you know, one of the most popular sports in the United States of America, at least, and probably in Canada too, is doing a critique of Stalin, the Soviet leader, for real and imagined transgressions. But hardly anybody talks about the fact that the Soviets, 1947, 1948, they were supporting the creation of the state of Israel. Why don't people criticize Stalin for that? But I guess that's asking too much.
I think you're right. When we move to the Congo elections, I guess Tshisekedi has been reelected Tshisekedi is the man who has been in power in the Congo for many moons, and the Congo is I guess one of the most important countries from the imperialists. Would you say the Congo is the most mineral-rich country on the continent, or one of the most minerally rich countries?
Well, I would say the latter, because certainly South Africa and Zimbabwe, or even Namibia, for that matter, or have to be part of that conversation. But Congo is important because it's important to the green economy, because of cobalt in particular, and it's part of it. It's also important to the U.S. economy because of the coltan that goes into smartphones. It has a population of about 100 million. It's about the size of Western Europe, in a territorial sense. It abuts 9 countries, which means it's in the heart of Africa. Mr. Tshisekedi, Felix Tshisekedi, he had a number of opponents, but it was a typical sort of masquerade type election, insofar as some of the candidates who were running against him were actually supported by his team, because they're trying to divide up the vote so that they felt that if it were just a 2-man or a 3-man or a 2-person or 3-person race, that his chances could be jeopardized. So I expect a fair amount of unrest, because there's a lot of tension between Rwanda and the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, because the leaders of the DRC, they charged that Rwanda is financing and funding guerrillas in eastern Congo, which in some ways makes it a no-go area for the central government, which is far to the west along the Congo River, not far distant from the Atlantic Ocean. So this crisis in the Congo is not going away anytime soon. And what needs to be recognized is that as you look forward in the 21st century, you'll see that the percentage of global population that is of African origin is going to expand, because what's happening in the so-called developed countries like the United States, South Korea, Italy, is that the number of children that are being born is going down. And then you have a particular crisis with regard to Black Americans, because for various reasons, not least due to the legacy of slavery and ongoing white supremacy, the infant mortality rate amongst Black women is just astounding. And it's not just a matter of class, because even affluent Black women, such as Beyonce, Serena Williams, have complained about the health care that they received when they were giving birth, which mimics the health care that poor Black women receive. That is to say, doctors not listening to you, for example, or engaging in procedures that are not necessarily warranted. I say all that to say that the global economy, the capitalist world in particular, I would say, faces a real crisis, because at the same time, when you look down the road, they're going to be more heavily dependent than ever upon the labor of youthful Black people. At the same time, when their philosophy, which is white supremacy, calls for or mandates that these Black people be repressed. And that's going to make it very difficult for them to compete with the People's Republic of China and its allies, which as of now includes the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus UAE, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, and we had thought Argentina.
Had you finished, sir?
Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask you a question about Paul Kagame. Many people feel that he is a stooge of Zionism. Is that correct? Is that a correct characterization?
A stooge of Zionism is probably a bridge too far. As a matter of fact, when I've done lectures about DRC, I always bring up the name of Dan Gertler, who is a billionaire who controls a good deal of the Congolese economy, and of course is an Israeli national. And so if you don't call Tshisekedi a stooge of Zionism in light of his relationship with Dan Gertler, why should we affix that label to Kagame? Now, to be sure, Kagame gets a pass from the North Atlantic countries. You know that in London right now, they're trying to work out a deal whereby immigrants who come into the UK without proper documentation are sent to Rwanda. I mean, you could be from Afghanistan, you could be from Nicaragua, you're going to wind up in Rwanda. And it's quite a lucrative deal from the point of view of Kigali, of Rwanda. It's not necessarily a good deal from the point of view of these undocumented migrants.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. Melinda, do you have some more questions?
Oh, well, do we want to move over to France and Niger?
Well, yeah, France shut down its embassy just in the last week or so, abandoned ship. This is part of the deteriorating relations with Niger in light of the irregular change of regime in July 2023. As we've said on these airwaves previously, Niger is now part of an alliance of Sahel states that includes Mali and Burkina Faso. They're united in not only their hostility to French neocolonialism and imperialism, but also they're trying to claw back from France a good deal of their treasuries. I think we talked about how with the change in regime in Niger, that the price of the uranium that's sold to Paris, the cost to France went up by several orders of magnitude. That's more money coming into Niger. Hopefully, it will mean more attention to education and healthcare. And this is part of this changing correlation of forces globally. A changing correlation of forces globally that I'm happy to say that I'll be addressing in Los Angeles on February 3rd, 2024 in Leimert Park. You'll soon be able to see on the website of kpfk.org the details of this book launch. And speaking of which, I've just submitted to the publishers, which means it'll come out sometime next year, late summer, early fall. My next book, Armed Struggle, ? Panthers and Communists, Black Nationalists and Liberals in Southern California through the 60s and 70s. Actually, Norman, you're part of the book because I mentioned you're seeking to evade conscription in the City of Angels and winding up in Ontario.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and you had to mention my comrade Al Prentice Bunchy Carter. I guess he would be. When I say mention, I guess he would. I would. Well, I'm looking forward to definitely seeing how you you deal with that situation. Deal with Bunchy. There were. You told me many years ago that you taught Al Prentice Bunchy Carter's daughter.
Yeah, that's right. I hope some of my friends haven't like her, Denon Carter, will come to this session. But, this Southern California book is probably going to get some criticism. I've noticed that in the Black community in the United States, for various reasons, there are certain folks you can criticize, certain folks you're not allowed to criticize. And I'm not sure if Eldridge Cleaver fits into either category. I think he might be in the category of people that you're not supposed to criticize. But I don't see how you can escape criticizing Eldridge. given the fact that he went from being a backer of what he called the Afro-American Liberation Army and denouncing those in the Panthers who didn't go along with him from his the comfort of his legation in Algiers, then comes back to the United States and joins the Mormons. He joins the Church of Latter-day Saints, and then sings like a canary to congressional committees and fingers his former comrades. So as a historian, I mean, how can I ignore that sort of double dealing? I don't know. We'll see, but I may have to hire security.
Yeah, because Eldridge. Well, I don't know. Our history. I mean, our memory is so short because it looks like Ronald Ronald Everett, aka Maulana Karenga. He seems to be getting a pass. I mean, he looks like people are talking about him like he's Christ now. And
well, you know, I got the receipts on Mr. Karenga. I went back and got the documents. You know, he went to jail for torturing black women. I can't even, since this is a family program, I can't repeat the details of how he tortured these black women. But suffice it to say that it was quite horrific. And of course, soon we'll be getting a lot of publicity because it's Kwanzaa time once again. Matter of fact, there's a big article about Kwanzaa in the New York Times today. And part of the problem is that I think that there might be a laudable attempt to forge a kind of black unity, and therefore you can't bring up all the contradictions. I mean, for example, if you look at the concept of black power, the way the folks talk about it today, people who are at each other's throats are considered to be the same, like the Panthers and Karenga, for example. They were shooting at each other. But you're not supposed to bring up that point. But how can you advance politically and ideologically if you don't get the history right? It's like you go to the doctor and you say, "Doctor, I'm having trouble breathing," but you don't tell the doctor about you're smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day for 30 years. I mean, things don't work like that. I mean, that's the dilemma that black people face nowadays.
Well, let me say this before we go, but you know, Karenga's biological brother, Cheston Everett, was my English teacher in middle school, junior high school. And let me go on record to say that he was my favorite teacher. Mr. Everett was, when you left Mr. Everett's class, he would put a bone in your back, because I remember he talked about Eleanor Jaquette, Phyllis Wheatley. I mean, when you left Mr. Everett's class, like he put, like I say, he would put a bone in your back. He would make you feel proud of being an African born in America and being part of, the African people, you know. So I always wanted to give my like I say, my favorite teacher, Mr. Everett, give him some credit.
Right on.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? I guess you talked about the Lamert Park thing. That's going to be beautiful. I know a lot of people are looking forward to that.
Well, I'm looking forward to it too. I'm always looking forward to getting back to the Southland.
Who's gonna be speaking with you?
Oh, as
Melina?
I said, Melina. She used to co-host, Melina Abdullah.
Yeah, Melina Abdullah. She gets a lot of Black Lives. She's one section of Black Lives Matter, but she is supposedly. I hear a lot of rave reviews about her. She's a very good, doing some great work in Los Angeles.
Oh, I concur.
Is there anything you'd like to add, but Dr. Horne, or are we finished?
I think we're past time.
Okay. All right. So, Melinda, you want to close the show?
Yeah, see everybody in the whirlwind just before the new year next week.
Oh, wait. I've got to thank Lisa Watson. I forgot about Lisa. You can't forget Without her, we wouldn't be able to come on. And thank you. Thank everybody.
All right, bye-bye.
Take care.